The way this disease is spread is by soil, by water, and by residue. So, as we're putting together a harvest plan, we need to think about how I could try to mitigate that risk moving into other fields.
This is the Stine Seedcast. I'm your host, David Thompson. Join me as we visit with growers, agronomists, seed experts, and other industry professionals about seed, agronomy, and the business of farming. Well, so Bill, I know you've been a guest on Seedcast before. Like I always like to do real quick, just maybe give us a little bit of quick history, your background, and what you do here at Stine.
Thanks, Dave. A quick rundown. My name is Bill Kessinger. I'm the technical agronomist for Stine Seed Company. I live in central Indiana on a small farm raising corn, soybeans, and a few 4-H calves. Graduated Purdue University with a degree in agronomy and became a certified professional agronomist in 2008. I started working with Stine in 2006 as an agronomist. Did that for a couple of years. Then I managed the state of Indiana and Ohio as a regional manager, regional sales agronomist for about a decade. And now I am back as an agronomy role. I'm a technical agronomist. I cover most of the U.S. east of the Mississippi River. Luckily, I have two great field agronomists, Ian Metzenbacher and Jacob Foote, who helped me. I couldn't do it without those guys, and a great team of regional sales agronomists to work with.
We're talking about red crown rot today. I guess we had done an episode on red crown rot last spring. We didn't know whether or not it was going to be an issue that's going to raise its head here this spring, but sounds like some conversation been had. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. So I guess for starters, maybe as a reminder, just talk a little bit about what red crown rot is, and what it is.
Well, basically, what red crown rot is, it's a fungal root rot disease. It can affect multiple plants, but as farmers, we basically see it in soybeans and peanuts. It's moved up from the south. It basically what it does, it resembles some other diseases, but it causes that plant to die prematurely at that R4 stage. So it really has a big yield loss because it affects that plant and basically stops growth during that grain fill stage. So we're seeing pretty significant yield losses in some areas. So it's becoming a big concern.
So I think you just kind of answered my next question, which was going to be, are we actually seeing red crown rot? So it sounds like you've had some run-ins with it. I guess tell me a little bit about what's the symptomology? What are the things that when you're out and about visiting with growers, what are those telltale signs that make you think, okay, we better be checking for red crown rot here?
Well, we first started noticing red crown rot about 3 weeks ago. Field agronomist Ian Metzenbacher was the first one that of the agronomy team that really identified it and grabbed a hold of it. It seems that central Illinois, southern Illinois really is a hot spot for that. And when you're out there trying to diagnose that and understand it, you kind of have to look a little bit closer at the red crown rot. Right now, you're going out there, you're seeing some of those spots that look like they're turning yellow, or maybe they're starting to die in that field, and you immediately think, well, that's just SDS coming in, or it's brown stem rot coming in. Well, the issue that we have with red crown rot is the foliar symptoms, the interveinal sclerosis looks the same. So your SDS, your brown stem rot, your red crown rot, if you're just looking at the leaves, tend to have some of the same symptomology. So what we have to do is then go out into those fields. And I think that's where some growers are missing right now, is they're just assuming that they're having SDS. When you go out in that field, you've got to go out there and you have to pull some plants. We have to start trying to take a look at that root structure and look at that main stem right at the base. Basically, if you're looking at it, we all know, for the most part, sudden death. We want to split that stem vertically, and we want to look at that vascular tissue. If that vascular tissue is white, we're pretty sure that we're seeing sudden death syndrome. If that vascular tissue is brown, we're seeing brown stem rot. Well, in the case of red crown rot, we actually want to look at the outside of that stem at the base. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to take a look at it, and you're going to see some red coloration. The best thing I can tell you is that hopefully if you got a hand lens or something that can zoom at least 10x, that's what I like to do, get some magnification on that. you can get down there and you can look at that and you're going to see little red balls called parathecia. That's going to be your telltale sign that you're seeing red crown rot. And that's going to be right at the base of that plant, right above the soil level. So it's one of those things that you can't diagnose just by looking at it from a distance. We have to pull it up and then try to pull it apart from some of these other diseases. And one of the other things that we're having an issue with is in diagnosing red crown rot is not only can a plant have red crown rot, it can also have sudden death. So we actually have two diseases going on at that same plant, making it very difficult for us to fully identify what it is without sending this to a lab. So we need to be able to get to those fields as soon as we can to really diagnose that. When you get a little later on into the season here and the plants begin to die, well, that red's going to start turning to a darker brown to a black color, and that's when it's starting to release that sclerotia. So it becomes hard to tell. One of the signs that we can assume is coming from that red crown rot is red crown rot causes that plant to die quicker than sudden death does. So those plants will die off just a little bit faster, and a lot of times you're still going to see that leaf still attached. So just a couple signs of what we're going to see. Usually if it's getting a little bit later, we're going to send that to that lab to verify it. But in those cases where the leaves are still hanging on and it's dying just a little bit quicker than what we're seeing some other diseases, we're going to assume that that's that red crown rot.
There's often a lot of confusion about what it is that you're seeing. Red crown rot, as I recall from our conversations last spring, can often get misdiagnosed as one of these other fungal diseases or a number of different diseases that impact soybeans. But what you're describing, pull the plants, check the roots, look for that telltale sign. I'm curious, are there specific field environments or scenarios where the farmer would see where they're more predisposed to potentially dealing with red crown rot versus other situations?
Well, typically what you're going to be looking for when the red crown rot is you're going to be you want to make sure we have that disease. You're looking at areas like Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Delaware. The last I checked were the states that had confirmed red crown rot. Not saying that it's not in the other states. That's just the last one I've seen. They update that quite a bit, so I could be a little bit behind on that. But making sure that we actually have the disease is step number one in that area. Than trying to diagnose that risk. The next is think about the spring that we had. A lot of us in many areas were wet. We started off wet, we continued wet, and it delayed planting. We know sudden death likes it to be cool and wet. Well, to try to help that, we delay that planting a little bit, and that usually helps sudden death. Well, red crown rot likes it warm and wet. Well, this spring it just kind of kept raining on a lot of us, and as the temperature kept increasing, we started getting into that 76, 78 degrees where red crown rot likes it, and we started getting into that environment where we were warm and wet. So once we seen that, we had suspicion that we were going to have a pretty high red crown rot year, and it really hasn't disappointed. I hate to say that as far as the grower side, but as far as the agronomics taking notes and understanding products, we've got a lot to work with because it's a pretty heavy year for red crown rot in some areas.
Once you have red crown rot, obviously there's a yield factor to consider. If you've diagnosed it that you have red crown rot, I guess, what are other things that a grower needs to be thinking about, especially this time of year as they're heading toward harvest? How does red crown rot maybe change the game plan for them at that point?
Great question, David. Once you've diagnosed that your field has red crown rot, there's not a lot we can do to fix it this year. What we can do is we can start understanding some of the challenges your farm faces and how do we try to mitigate those risks into the future. So in the short term, we have to understand how this disease is spread. The way this disease is spread is by soil, by water, and by residue. So as we're putting together a harvest plan, we need to think about how I could try to mitigate that risk moving into other fields. We know that it's just going to be hot spots, so it's not like that whole field's going to senesce early and is going to die off early. So it's not going to really change the timing of when that field's going to be ready, but you might want to change your timing of when you were going to harvest it. By that, I mean maybe move it to something a little bit later or almost last in your harvestability. That way you don't spread that seed, you don't spread all that sclerotia to that next field because your combine's going to pick it up, your grain cart's going to pick it up, and you're going to move to that next field. And basically, you're just going to infect it as you move through. So, thinking about how do I try to mitigate my risk, I want to try to slow down that spread. So, I want to try to keep my machinery clean. And I might think about maybe harvesting some of those infected fields towards the end. That way, I don't move it to some of the other fields.
So as you're talking about that, we're talking about harvest timing and priority order of those fields. Does the same rule apply to things like whatever fall tillage, other equipment that's going to come in contact with soil?
Oh, definitely, David. Anything that's coming in contact with the soil that's in that affected field, you're going to take that chance of moving it to the next field, mitigating and getting that risk. Because we all understand the disease triangle. You got to have a disease, you got to have a host, and you got to have an environment. Well, the more disease I put into a field, the higher that pressure is going to be. So if I can try to keep that isolated, then I can manage that better in the future. So we got to look how many times we're going into those fields, how we're cleaning our machinery, and what we're going into next. Because you're talking about millions and millions of sclerotia per acre. So even if we clean that off and we get 99% of them, you're still moving thousands and thousands of sclerotia into that next field. And that's if we're doing a really good job and we're not just taking a piece of equipment from one field to the next. So thinking about our tillage options, thinking about our harvest options is key to try to reduce the effect of red crown rot across all of your acres.
So, Bill, a little bit ago, you talked about the interaction or sort of the interplay that exists between red crown rot and sudden death and brown stem rot, how they often get misdiagnosed, how they often can be coexist at the same time in these fields. Curious about another pest that we deal with in soybeans all the time, soybean cyst. Is there any interaction specific to red crown rot as it relates to soybean cyst nematode?
Another great question we get a lot there, David. Is there any direct correlation between the two? Not necessarily, but I think there's some symbiotic effects. We have to think about when red crown rot affects the plant. It's going to affect that plant in the spring. Well, how does a nematode work? A nematode actually burrows into that root of that soybean plant. So anytime that nematodes or however many nematodes you have is going into that plant, you're creating an infection site. Each one of those infection sites is a place that this disease can now start taking hold onto that soybean plant. So the higher the nematode pressure, the more of those sites you're going to have. So it's not that one needs the other one to survive. They do not. But if you happen to have a higher nematode level, you're just going to increase that environment to allow that disease. Going back to that disease triangle, you're making a much easier environment for red crown rot to take effect.
Sure. Okay. So, so I guess you've talked about a lot of the diagnosis and some of the symptomology and some of the things that we can do from a practical standpoint. I guess to kind of roll it all back together, I guess I wondered if you'd step through for me. If you have a grower who reaches out to you and says, "Hey, I've got something going on in this soybean field. I have some premature death. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Would you come look at it?" And let's say you're going out and you diagnose that this is in fact red crown rot. So talk us through what you advise the grower, how you advise the grower from the point that they're seeing it to the point beyond where you say, okay, now we know what it is. Here's what you do about it.
Once we've identified it and we maybe have sent some stuff off to the lab and we've proven what it is, and we have confirmed you have red crown rot, we got to start thinking about managing that into the future. And there are a couple different options. I know there's a few seed treatments out there that claim they have control. That's one way to look at it, and that's definitely a way to help. But the agronomy department has really taken a proactive step into this, is understanding which varieties are more or less susceptible to this disease. We're seeing major differences between the different varieties. So understanding that, hey, I want a high yielding soybean, But maybe to enhance those high yields, we're going to have to battle red crown rot, or we're going to have to battle root knot nematode, or anything else like that. We got to understand, hey, I need a product that isn't as susceptible to it for those acres. And that's what a big step of the agronomy department is right now, is identifying which products are more or less susceptible. That way we can get the highest yield onto your farm. And that's the key, is to have that conversation. And when I say less susceptible, that doesn't mean that it cannot get red crown rot. There's nothing out there that is 100% resistant to red crown rot. Anything with enough pressure is going to be able to get it. Now, it's very similar to SDS or brown stem rot. We put ratings on those of which ones we think are less susceptible or more susceptible. And most of the time those ratings come in very accurate. But underneath enough pressure, anything can get it. So I want to make that clear, that there are products that definitely do a lot better against red crown rot, but there is nothing out there that is 100% resistant.
From the podcast we did last spring talking about red crown rot and kind of its trajectory, I know that it's been around a while. It's not a new issue, but certainly one that's, I would say, seems to be gaining some importance, or it's becoming more prevalent maybe. You talked about variety selection being important. Are there certain things you're looking for from a soybean that might indicate that it's going to perform better against red crown rot?
Well, one big thing that's always set Stine apart is we look for yield. The plant has to yield. So that's our number one point, that we want high yielding soybeans. Then we'll go in and start looking at it, because if something does get a little bit of red crown rot but still out yields all the other products, that's still a really good product, and we're still going to use that in those areas. So we want to try to check that score. So how bad is it getting it? How bad is that product getting red crown rot? And what does that correlate into yield or yield loss? So that's one of the biggest things that we want to understand is, okay, we're going to go out there, we're going to take the notes, and we're going to score it on how well that it's handling red crown rot. Then we'll take that and we'll correlate that to yield and put that to bushels. And at the end of the day, that's where that score is going to run, that, hey, this one may not be the best on red crown rot, but it still yields very well in red crown rot pressure, under red crown rot pressure, if that makes any sense. So it's not a one or an all or nothing. Everything still has to revert back to yield, and we have to understand that that's the ultimate goal as a grower. We have to have high yields, and we want the most return on investment as we can get. So we have to understand that on the seed side is, what are we going to give up compared to what are we going to get, and what risk do we want to take as a grower? So those are the conversations where we're wanting to have is, okay, how much defense do you want? And will that give up any yield potential at the end of the day on that farm?
And it seems to me like many cases like this with diseases, timing is kind of everything, right? So depending on what time of the year that infection occurs or what time the symptoms show, may dictate how much potential yield loss can occur. Assume red crown rot is the same way. There's probably is there a point at which if it's late enough, it's not going to have a measurable impact on yield, or is it really devastating enough that it needs to be dealt with at any time of the year?
Well, it's one of those things that once you get it can be devastating, but there's not a whole lot we can deal with it in the short term. Once we kind of have it, we have it, and it can be devastating in those areas. The later that it comes in, of course, it's going to have less of an effect. And that's all going to be on that environment. When did your rains come? What's the temperature? And that's going to affect some of the severity of it. But we have to understand a disease like similar to red crown rot, it's not going to affect an entire field. So it's not like you're going to see it from the front row to the back row and all the way across it. The easiest way I can explain it to a lot of people, when you're looking at diseases in a soybean field or a corn field, it's kind of like looking at that piece of bread that you might have left in the cabinet just a little bit too long. When you go back and look at it, that piece of bread, it's not green all over. It's just got hot spots where you got a green spot over here, a green spot over there. That's what your field's like. with when you start seeing some of the diseases. You're going to see hot spots. So in those areas, yes, you could have a significant yield loss. Then you could go over 50 to 100 feet and you could be right at 100% yield capacity. So you're going to have some damage, you're going to have some loss, but the severity is just going to it's all going to depend on the environment and what your field is.
So, Bill, as we round out our conversation here today about red crown rot, is there anything in your travels? Is there any one thing that you want to make sure growers come to understand, whether there's a misunderstanding or whether it's just something that's not well known about red crown rot? What would you want growers to understand about red crown rot?
The best thing I can tell a grower right now about red crown rot, if you're interested in it, if you have questions about it, contact your Stine agronomist. The Stine agronomy department is very, I'd say, diligent in understanding how red crown rot works, where it moves, and making sure that we got the products and of which varieties are handling it better. So I'd say that the agronomy team has a very good handle on red crown rot and how it moves and what it does. So I would say if you're looking for an expert to give you some advice on red crown rot, reach out to the Stine agronomy staff. I think as a team, we're doing a great job of understanding this disease.
Well, great, Bill. As always, great to have you on the Seedcast, and I appreciate you joining us today to shed some light on red crown rot and how to diagnose it and how to deal with it. As always, great to have you on, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, David.